Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming along to the open day. So I'm Luke. I'm counting as final year PhD student now, and I'm also in the same lab as Teresa, so the Subcota lab. And in the lab, we're interested in researching molecules that can either cause disease or if we can therapeutically target them to help treat or prevent disease. So I'm from the Scottish borders. Has anybody been there before? Yeah, a few people. Yeah. Little tiny village between Jedburgh and Hawick. Don't know if you.
Jedburgh.
Yeah, so I went to high school there. And then I came to Dundee in 2011 to do my undergraduate, and I stayed here for the PhD because I liked it so much. And as Teresa said, it's the sunniest city in Scotland, so I have to stay there. So to start my talk, I'm just going to give you a bit of an analogy. So I want you to imagine we're building a city. So when you're building anything, you have to start with some building materials. So in this case, we'll have some bricks. Then we assemble all these building materials together, and you start to form buildings. And then those buildings, when they're all together, you have businesses, shops, houses. When they all come together, they form the functional city. So this is Dundee. So when you're building a body, it's not too dissimilar. You start off with some building materials. In this case, we have cells. And these cells all come together to form the functional organs, like the heart shown here. And then when these organs all come together and they function in harmony, you have the fully formed human being, like Mr. Bean shown here. So cells are the building blocks of life, and together they come together to form the organs. So can anybody give me a name of an organ in your body? Yeah. Yeah, we got one. Kidney, that's a good one, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Skin, that's a very good one, yeah. So skin's your biggest organ by surface area. Anybody else? Yeah. Heart, good one, yeah. The brain, very good, yeah. Probably the most important one. Okay, so there's lots of different organs and your cells make them all. So it's not easy being a cell. There's quite a few challenges that face them. So one of them is age. As you become older, your cells get older as well. Can also become infected. Has anybody had the cold recently? Or the flu? Yeah, so it's quite common, especially in the winter time. But we've had quite a good spell of decent weather in Dundee, so hopefully you've not been too inflicted recently. And another one is DNA damage. So somebody mentioned DNA before. So this is the genetic code that is the instructions for your cells. So if something happens with some DNA damage, then things can start to go wrong in the cellular environment. So to combat all these different stresses, your cells need to divide and copy themselves. So you have one cell and it becomes two cells. So this is basically cell division at its simplest form. And to keep a nice healthy pool of cells in your body, you have to constantly replenish your cells. So as you're sitting here at the moment, your cells are dividing and replenishing and keeping you nice and healthy. So this to show you what cell division looks like in real life, I've got a little video. So this is a cell that comes from a bone cancer cell line, and I want you to focus on this cell here in the middle. It's just about to divide. So one cell and it becomes two. So I'll show you that again if I can. We'll go back and then forward. Okay, so one cell and then it becomes two. So this is happening at this very moment, and it happens all the time throughout your life to keep you nice and healthy. Okay, so sometimes with these stresses that I mentioned, such as age and infection, when something goes wrong, the body recognizes that this cell is not healthy and something happens, and the cell basically enters a cell death program and is not allowed to keep going because of it's damaged. So it's a very important mechanism for keeping you healthy and making sure your cells aren't being able to be kept going if they're going to be harmful to you. So it's not just important in adult life. The most important event in your life so far was probably the fusion of an egg cell from your mother and the sperm cell from your father, And these came together to form one single cell, and that single cell kept dividing and dividing and dividing trillions of times to form the human being. So that's quite a remarkable feat in itself, how one single cell can turn into a whole human being over the course of a few months. So different factors determine what type of organ or cell type your cells are going to become. If it's going to become a bone, for example, bone factors will help determine its outcome. And for every organ, different factors will help coordinate what type of cell it's going to turn into. But it's not quite as simple as that, in that cells keep going and dividing, because some cells don't divide at all. Can anyone think of a cell type that might not divide? Yeah, neurons, yes. So these are the cells that make up the main part of your brain, and they're very important for your nervous system and things like your eyesight, your sense of smell, your sense of taste. So you can imagine that if these cells don't divide and don't replenish themselves, you have to take very good care of them. And this is why things like paralysis and loss of sight, they're very difficult to, well, impossible to treat at the moment, because the cells won't divide and keep going. So this is why you hear people to tell you to not spend a lot of time looking at computer screens in case you damage your eyes, because those cells are not going to keep repairing themselves like, for example, your skin cells do. So if you cut yourself accidentally, then eventually those cells will repair and keep dividing, and you won't notice it anymore. But your nervous system is much more complicated. So cell division is very tightly controlled and regulated. There's lots of rules that govern what happens in cell division to make sure it's a nice smooth process. And I mentioned before DNA damage, so I just want to focus in on that a bit more. So if a cell becomes, its DNA becomes damaged, there's a couple of different outcomes. One of them is it's a non-harmful mutation. So we heard about mutations from Teresa. So these are changes to the cellular DNA which makes the cell not like the normal healthy cell. But in this case, some mutations don't have any effect at all, and they're fine, there's no outcome. But in some cases, you can have a harmful mutation which changes what the cell is doing, what its role is in the body. So as I said before, usually these are picked up by the body and they're targeted for cell death. But in the context of cancer, what happens is these mutations progressively accumulate and you have uncontrolled cellular growth. So has anybody heard of a tumor? Yeah, so a tumor is basically a massive clump of cells which have just continuously divided and divided and divided and kept going and to form this massive lump. And it's very energetically demanding and takes away a lot of vital resources from your body. So and cancer is essentially a cell cycle defect. So if the cell can't divide properly, it can lead to cancer. So treating cancer is very difficult because you have cancers of different organs, and within those organs, the underlying cause or mutation of that cancer can be very different between patients. So there's not one remedy that can treat all cancers at once. So it's very difficult to treat. But there's two kind of main strategies that are being used at the moment. One of them is to try and destroy the cancer cells, and the other one is to try and repair them to put them back into a healthy cell fate. So has anybody played the computer game Fortnite? Yeah, I thought a few children in the audience might have. So the strategy is either to destroy them or try and heal them. So this isn't just our lab in Dundee that's working on this, it's a huge effort from around the world, and hopefully one day together we'll be able to start finding treatments for these different types of cancers. And one of these that we're interested in is by looking at the cell division as a means of trying to control that, and then could be potentially increase the time it takes a cell to divide. And if we do that, you have a much greater window of opportunity for some drugs to act to stop the cells from dividing. So that's one of the things we're interested in. So thank you for your time, and if anyone has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you. Yes.